A recent academic journal entry penned by a Harvard Law School professor stirred outrage across academia and civil society as he claimed victims of Imperial Japan sex slavery were voluntary prostitutes on competitive salary schemes. Despite strong opposition of J. Mark Ramseya's work with a global petition for its removal, the International Review of Law and Economics has insisted on keeping it in the final publication. We discussed this ongoing controversy with Dr. Richard W. Painter, who is the S. Walter Ritchie Professor of Corporate Law at the University of Minnesota and former Chief Ethics Lawyer to President George W. Bush. He is also the Vice Chair of Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, also known as CREW. It's lovely to have you on our show, Dr. Painter. How are you today?
Well, doing well, doing well. It's getting warmer here in Minnesota.
Well, Minnesota is known for being very cold, so I'm glad it's getting warmer there. But, well, I'm sure you've heard, well, there's been this huge uproar against this piece of writing by Dr. Ramseya at Harvard, which must have come as quite a surprise to you, especially as he's affiliated with the university that was your alma mater for your undergrad years. What were your thoughts on Ramseya's logic and his analysis of the comfort woman issue in his recent paper?
Well, I was a history major in college, and I know how to do historical research, and there's absolutely no historical research in that article. He did not read any contracts that he purports to have existed between the women who were dragooned into sex slavery and the Japanese Imperial Army. He didn't read any contracts. He doesn't understand the Korean language. He didn't bother interviewing any of the people who were party to those contracts. It's incredibly shoddy historical research, and instead he uses some simplistic game theory model that now two Nobel Prize winners in economics have said is complete rubbish and doesn't prove his point at all. It's really very unfortunate. We've had this in law now for several decades, where we have people who purport to be experts in law and economics who don't know much about law or economics, and then write this kind of thing. In 1991, he wrote another article on Japanese imperial sex slavery, or the sex trade, incredible commitments in the commercial sex industry in imperial Japan. So he seems to be interested in this topic, has been for several decades. But this article just makes absolutely no sense. And it's really quite cruel. I mean, he's accusing women who were sex slaves, who were victims of war crimes and rape. He's calling them prostitutes. And that's really quite disgusting. And Americans are really embarrassed to have this having taken place in our country.
And obviously, Ramseya, he must have known that this would cause controversy and stir a lot of anger and reputation as well. So what do you think really motivated him to publish such an inflammatory piece of writing at this time? And why do you think that the journal decided to publish this?
Well, I think some academics in the United States like to show off and show that because they have tenure at a prestigious university and lifetime employment protection, they can do or say anything they want. I approached two editors of the journal, and one of them gave me a very rude reply and said that basically they were going to go ahead and publish this, and they were only interested in economic analysis that would confront this article. That he wasn't interested in any of the normative values, for example, that sex slavery is wrong, that women should not be forced to have sex with dozens of soldiers a day. This, by the way, has absolutely nothing to do with economics, and I don't know why it's in a journal of law and economics. It's about a war crime.
Well, economics is supposed to be about choices made by rational actors, but of course there's no choice in slavery. But, well, you've been at the forefront of calling for the removal of Ramseya's writing from the International Review of Law and Economics. And, well, you've mentioned their response so far, not very positive, I suppose, but what kind of discipline do you think is needed?
Well, I believe that the journal should continue to be pressured to remove this article. I posted the names of the four editors on my Twitter page. I mean, they should be contacted, and people should continue to work with them and their academic institutions, because this isn't just about Harvard. This journal claims that this article passed peer review. This is incredibly shoddy work. No historians were contacted about this so-called peer review. And now we have thousands of economists who have said that this is shoddy research. The journal needs to retract the article. There's just no two ways around it. And I believe the editors should be contacted in their home institutions. So one of them is with the University of Pennsylvania. I think it's really quite embarrassing.
And of course, this whole issue touches upon such a sensitive spot between South Korea and Japan and their ongoing the ties that have deteriorated between them. And this issue hasn't been settled despite the victims' call for their voices to be heard and proper retributions to be made. And even the UN Committee on Enforced Disappearances, their 2018 report urged Japan to provide accurate data on the number of victims, as well as offering an adequate compensation to them. But still, a number of Japanese politicians, they've called the victims prostitutes, as Ramsaya did, and they insist that the case is closed. But for South Korea, the issue, well, on our end, it's also been quite politicized, and there seems to be no way for the two governments to see eye to eye on this. Do you think there is any ideal way of really arbitrating or settling this issue at all?
Well, I think we should move beyond this being just an issue between Japan and Korea. This is about how women are treated by men, and particularly in wartime. When men feel particularly aggressive and they're going off to combat, and the way women are treated, and we've seen this in other places too. The comfort woman phenomenon is not unique to the Japanese Imperial Army. And rape committed in wartime. There were Germans who were raped, many Germans raped by Soviet soldiers at the end of World War II. Rape is a crime that is committed in wartime more than at other times. Rape is a serious crime, and that is what this is about. And what is shocking here is we have a white man, such as myself, a Caucasian from the United States, who thinks this is something that he can write a law and economics article about and call it game theory. And he's talking about rape victims. So this is about how men treat women, or some men treat women. And this is not about Japan versus Korea versus China. We need to bring the world together to support democracy, human rights, women's rights. We have much work to do together, and not to reopen old wounds. But what Professor Ramsayer has done is very, very selfish and reckless, and must be repudiated. And the journal editors must be called to account. And for them to send rude emails to us and tell us that they're going to insist on publishing this garbage, simply for their own egos. And that's what this is about, the egos of American professors, to stir up this type of a thing, which is very, very hurtful for the people of Japan and Korea.
Exactly, I agree with you that the article certainly hasn't helped the already rocky relations between Seoul and Tokyo. And it's been, well, Mr. Biden has emphasized strengthening his alliances in the Indo-Pacific region. And of course, two key partners are South Korea and Japan, and it's in America's best interest that the two neighbors get along. So there's been a great deal of attention on whether he'll be trying to encourage stronger ties between these our two countries. Do you think he will be taking the initiative to do that, to strengthen or to encourage Seoul and Tokyo to mend their ties?
I believe so. That President Biden wants to heal the wounds that we've seen opened up through 4 years of Donald Trump. Secretary of State Tony Blinken is committed to diplomacy and working with the countries around the world. We've abandoned the so-called America First mantra of Donald Trump, which was also the mantra of the isolationists who didn't want our country to enter into World War II in Europe. We are, in the United States, committed to the international community. And President Biden and Secretary Blinken want to take us in that direction. And many, many Americans feel that way. And once again, we are not here to say that we are superior to the rest of the world because we're the United States. That was the attitude of Donald Trump. And I have to say the attitude of Professor Ramsayer, who belittles women, not only from Korea, but from Japan. As I say, he wrote an article a number of decades ago about Japanese girls being sold at a very young age into prostitution, as if it's somehow funny. And that's not the way most of us in the United States feel about our friends in Japan and Korea and around the world. And I see a much brighter future as we move forward into the presidency of Joe Biden and hopefully to repudiate this type of quite frankly racist as well as misogynistic attitude in the United States.
And well, you were George W. Bush's chief ethics lawyer, and well, it has always been it has been the core objective of America's foreign policy to spread values such as political freedoms, human rights and democracy when handling foreign relations. And it looks like Joe Biden will be trying to bring all this back as he aims to return America to the head of the table in global diplomacy, as he said. And well, last week we saw Washington come up with a report that said Washington officials believe that Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, he approved of the move to kill Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi. And well, the Biden administration, they also placed sanctions and travel bans on key Saudi figures as a result. Do you think this is a step in the right direction?
It is a step in the right direction. I believe that American presidents, both Democratic and Republican, have kowtowed to the Saudi government for too long. Saudi Arabia is an authoritarian regime. Women have very few rights in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia says that they are tough on terrorism, and yet there are doubts about that, severe doubts about that. And the murder of a journalist is atrocious. This is a serious crime that has not been punished. I cannot imagine that this murder was not ordered at the very highest levels of the Saudi government. So while I applaud President Biden for taking some steps to address this, we need to be a lot more willing to confront Saudi Arabia with their behavior, which is not good for the Middle East, is not good for bringing about peace. The idea that Saudi Arabia is a counterweight to Iran it only takes us so far. We cannot tolerate this type of reckless behavior, a murder of a journalist that was perpetrated by the government of Saudi Arabia with impunity. It's unacceptable.
And in your book, Dr. Painter, your book, American Nero, you noted how former President Trump's narcissism, unlawfulness and authoritarianism really undermined the rule of law. And you wrote this, of course, even before the insurrection at the Capitol happened on January 6th this year. What kind of ethical leadership do you hope to see from President Biden for American society to truly heal, as well as for the restoration of democratic values and institutions not only in the US, but also around the world as well?
We certainly need to fix a lot in our government. Our campaign finance system is broken. It's corrupt with too much influence of money in politics in the United States. The House of Representatives has a bill, H.R. 1, that's going to address a lot of that. I hope it gets through the Senate. President Biden also does need to look at whatever crimes were committed in the previous administration and hold people accountable. We cannot just simply ignore criminal acts, even by those in the highest reaches of our government. It's also very, very important in the United States to do two things. One is to engage with the rest of the world, no longer have the attitude of America first and it's going to be our way or the highway. We need to engage with, whether it's with the Paris Accord, climate change, or whether it's with the countries in Asia on trying to restore peace and deal with the situation in North Korea. We need to work with our allies. We also need to reduce the power of the presidency. There's too much power in the hands of one individual, and that is not the intent of the framers of our Constitution. And that's how Republican forms of government can turn into dictatorships. It happened in ancient Rome, which went from a republic to a dictatorship and an empire, and that's why we call the book American Nero. It happened much more quickly in Germany in 1933 as a Republican form of government changed into a dictatorship very, very quickly. And the problem is the concentration of power in the hands of one individual, whether it be the President of the United States or a Prime Minister or a Chancellor of Germany. That is not a path to preserving democracy. So we do need to address that in the United States. So presidential power, abuse of power, the notion the president is somehow immune from prosecution while he's in office. I repudiated that recently in an article with Professor Claire Finkelstein at the University of Pennsylvania. And in an amicus brief we submitted to the United States Supreme Court, we need to constrain presidential power.
Well, hopefully your next book we'll see a transition from American Nero to hero then. But, well, we'll have to wrap up the interview here today, Dr. Painter. Thank you so much for your time. That was Dr. Richard W. Painter, Professor of Corporate Law at the University of Minnesota and former Chief Ethics Lawyer to President George W. Bush. Thank you again so much for your time today.
Thank you very much for having me.
And to our viewers, as always, thank you very much for watching.